A few days ago, at the time of making this video, Joe Rogan and independent researcher Cassie Coppersmith spent a significant chunk of a nearly 3-hour conversation, episode 2528 of the Joe Rogan Experience, on one of the most visually striking and persistently debated topics in all of ancient history. Elongated skulls. Coppersmith has personally examined elongated skulls in 4 different countries. Rogan pointed out that some of these skulls have cranial capacities 20 to 30% larger than a modern human skull, a claim Coppersmith confirmed from her own observations. No sagittal suture, the midline seam that runs across every normal human head. Different eye socket dimensions, a shifted foramen magnum, the hole at the base of the skull where the spinal cord connects. Both made the case that at least some of these skulls cannot be explained by head binding alone. Rogan, characteristically, was convinced. These skulls are real, he pointed out. They are in museums. They are not hoaxes. The question is what they actually are. That question deserves a proper answer. Because the full story, the real story, the one archaeology has actually documented, is strange enough on its own merits. It does not need extraterrestrials, and it does not need a cover-up. Let's actually look at what we know. The first thing to establish, because it matters, is that the skulls are absolutely real. No serious archaeologist disputes their existence. They have been in museums and studied for nearly a century. The most famous collection was discovered in 1928 by Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello on the Paracas Peninsula, a desert coastal region in southern Peru. Tello found more than 300 of them in elaborate burial sites, wrapped in extraordinarily fine textiles alongside food, tools, and offerings. The Paracas people, who flourished from roughly 800 to 100 BCE, were sophisticated in multiple respects. Their weaving technology alone is considered among the finest produced in the ancient world, and a significant number of them had dramatically elongated skulls. Elongated skulls have also been found in Egypt, notably during the reign of Akhenaten and his family, whose artistic depictions show dramatically extended crania. In Malta, at Avebury in England, one of the major megalithic sites. In France, where a style known as the Toulouse deformity was practiced for centuries. Among indigenous cultures across North America, particularly the northwest coast, in ancient Australia, across Eastern Europe. This is not a localized anomaly. Elongated skulls appear in cultures across multiple continents across thousands of years of human history. That geographic and temporal spread is itself one of the most interesting things about them, and it is the key to understanding what they actually are. The scientific consensus on the overwhelming majority of elongated skulls is clear, well evidenced, and frankly remarkable in its own right. They are the result of intentional cranial deformation, a deliberate cultural practice in which the skulls of infants were reshaped through external pressure applied during the earliest months of life. Here's how it worked. A human skull is not rigid at birth. The bones of the cranium are separated by flexible gaps called fontanelles, which allow the head to compress during the birth process and then expand as the brain grows rapidly in the first years of life. These gaps typically close between the ages of 1 and 2. During that narrow window, sustained external pressure can permanently alter the skull's final shape. Different cultures use different techniques. The Paracas and many other Andean cultures used a method called annular deformation, wrapping tight bindings around the skull in a way that forced it to grow vertically rather than laterally. Other cultures used boards, flat pieces of material applied to the front and back of the skull during infancy, producing a flattened, elongated result. Some techniques produce dramatic peaks. Others produce broad, sweeping extensions. The practice appears independently in cultures that had no contact with each other. It was practiced in ancient Peru, in ancient Egypt, in ancient France, among indigenous North Americans, across Melanesia, each culture arriving at the same basic discovery, that infant skulls can be shaped, and using that discovery for their own cultural purposes. And those purposes were almost universally the same: status, beauty, and spiritual or social significance. In many cultures, a prominently elongated skull was a marker of nobility, of priestly status, of belonging to an elite class. Slaves were sometimes explicitly prohibited from the practice. The more dramatic the elongation, the higher the social standing it communicated. This is not barbaric or mysterious. It is a remarkably widespread human behavior that reflects something very consistent across cultures: the use of the body as a canvas for communicating social identity. Now let us address the claims made on the Rogan podcast directly, because they deserve specific responses rather than dismissal. Claim 1. The elongated skulls have no sagittal suture. The sagittal suture is the seam that runs along the top of a normal human skull where two parietal bones fuse. Coppersmith and others have argued that some elongated skulls lack this feature entirely, and that this cannot be explained by cranial binding. The response from physical anthropologists is that cranial deformation applied during infancy absolutely can alter suture development. Pressure applied during the critical period when those bones are still unfused can change how and whether those sutures form in their standard configuration. This is not a mysterious anatomical impossibility. It is a predictable consequence of applying sustained pressure to developing bone during early childhood. Claim 2. The skulls have 20 to 30% greater cranial capacity than modern humans. This is the most persistent and most misleading claim in the elongated skull debate. The argument goes that while binding can change a skull's shape, it cannot change its total volume. So, if these skulls are genuinely larger in capacity, binding cannot explain them. The problem is that the cranial volume measurements cited in most alternative history discussions come primarily from a single non-peer-reviewed source: researcher Brian Furster, who operates a privately owned museum in Paracas, and whose claims have not been replicated or validated by the mainstream scientific community. Formal bioarchaeological measurements of Paracas skulls have not confirmed the dramatic capacity differences being claimed. It is also worth noting that Forster is not a credentialed archaeologist or anthropologist. His preliminary DNA claims about the Paracas skulls, which generated enormous excitement in alternative history circles, were never published in a peer-reviewed journal, never independently verified, and have been explicitly rejected by geneticists who study ancient DNA. Claim 3. These skulls represent a different species, or a different type of human entirely. DNA analysis that has been conducted under proper scientific conditions on Paracas skulls has confirmed that they are human. They cluster genetically with other ancient Andean populations. They show the expected genetic markers of people who lived in that region during that time period. There is no genetic evidence of a separate species, a hybrid lineage, or an extraterrestrial origin. The scientific conclusion, supported by DNA evidence, cranial morphology studies, and a century of archaeological context, is that these are the remains of members of the Paracas culture who practiced deliberate cranial deformation for cultural reasons. Here's the thing that is genuinely interesting, and that the alternative history conversation tends to get backwards. The widespread appearance of elongated skulls across unconnected cultures is not evidence of a hidden race or lost civilization. It is evidence of something arguably more interesting: that across the ancient world, independently, cultures kept arriving at the same idea, that an elongated head communicates something special, something elevated, something closer to the divine. In ancient Egypt, the elongated skull imagery associated with Akhenaten and his family, especially his daughter Meritaten and his wife Nefertiti, may have been artistic convention rather than literal anatomy. But the convention itself reveals what elongated heads meant culturally: divine lineage, solar connection, a being set apart from ordinary humanity. In Paracas burial culture, the effort invested in reshaping a child's skull from birth, months of binding, checking, adjusting, communicated to every observer something unmistakable about that child's place in the social order. In mythology across multiple cultures, the elongated heads of gods, of supernatural beings, of ancestors, the elongated skull appears again and again as a visual shorthand for power, wisdom, and a connection to forces beyond the ordinary human world. The question of why so many separate cultures associated elongated heads with elevated status is genuinely interesting. The fact that the skulls themselves are the product of a human cultural practice does not make that question less interesting. If anything, it makes it more interesting, because it means this idea emerged independently in multiple civilizations, none of whom needed an alien to give it to them. So, what are the elongated skulls? They are real. They are human. They are the deliberately modified remains of people who belong to cultures that considered this practice an expression of status, beauty, and spiritual significance. They appear across the ancient world not because of a hidden lost civilization, but because humans, independently, repeatedly, keep arriving at the same ideas about what a powerful body looks like. The Joe Rogan conversation with Cassie Coppersmith raises genuine questions worth asking. The skulls deserve serious attention. The anatomical claims deserve scrutiny, not dismissal. But scrutiny is what peer-reviewed science provides, and what it has consistently found is that these skulls are extraordinary evidence of human cultural practice, not of something beyond the human. The real story does not need aliens to be strange. Ancient people shaped their children's skulls from birth to communicate something about who they were and where they stood in their world. They built elaborate burial sites. They wove some of the finest textiles ever produced. They did this across multiple continents without ever meeting each other. That is genuinely remarkable, and it happened right here on Earth. Like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. I'll see you in the next one.